Back in Austin, you guys. I'm going to start with the poem that's in the review. It's called On the News, and I was, about a year ago, there were several news stories that were kind of circulating and all sort of came together for me. So a little over a year ago, there was a mass shooting at Umpqua Community College in Oregon, and the shooter killed 9 people and injured several others. In the midst of this, I was watching a news report about Syrian refugees who were drowning, trying to flee from Syria. And in the midst of this frightening and tragic news, NASA made an announcement that they had confirmed water on Mars in the form of ice. And a few days before that, the blood moon. I had gone outside. I was teaching at University of Memphis at this time and had gone outside with some colleagues and students to watch the blood moon, which is a rare lunar event when the moon has a reddish tint to it. So this is called On the News. If this was a different kind of story, what happened that day, the shots like distant fireworks, like rulers slapped against the board, the dawning realizations, the running, would not have happened at all. And we'd be left not knowing that we could feel this way, our lungs singed, our foreheads throbbing. But this is the only story there is, the only one we know. And so what happened did happen. And we woke remembering the blood-red moon just nights before, the rusty flare beneath clouds moving swiftly by. And we learned that there is water on Mars, and that it was there all along. Not distant marks left by water long evaporated, but water stilled and surging. More water than we could have imagined, not waiting for us to see or to know, but just there, far beyond the gunshots, the broken rafts, the fears, the loneliness, just water being water, still and silent in the vacuum blackness of the sky. My mom had a dream when she was just married to my dad that she claims was the most vivid dream of her life. So vivid that it felt like a vision at the time. She was living in Dallas, that's where I'm from, and she saw in this dream a little boy, 4 or 5 years old, hopping up and down on a curb at a specific intersection in Dallas. And it was so vivid, she made my dad get up with her and drive to that intersection and look for him. And there was nobody there. And I wrote this poem with that in mind. It's called The Boy. He was wearing cowboy boots, dark red, too large for his own feet. He was no older than 4, and the boots clapped the cement as he hopped from the curb to the street and up again, crunching bottle caps, empty cups, litter tossed from cars. I knew the corner where he stood, had seen it on my way to work, at the far end of town, beneath an overpass, desolate, dangerous. When I woke to tell what I had seen, you shushed me. It was just a dream. I listened and heard your breath steady once again, your back turned away from me, who would not be calmed. For weeks I scanned the newspaper, looking for the story of a boy disappeared, lost and found or never found. I didn't know what else to do. You teased me that I thought he was my own, a child never born, and I think I half believed you, lying in the dark that night, driving to the corner the next day, wanting him to be there, calling for him, a name I did not know. And this is a poem about my dad. A couple of years ago, I thought for flu season, this would be a good poem to read. A couple of years ago, my dad was sick with the flu. He got up in the night and he fell because he was woozy from being ill and was a little disoriented. He got back in bed and fell asleep and did not remember that he had fallen until the next day when someone pointed out a gash in his head, and then it came back to him what had happened. So this is called My Father at 60. It's November, and my father has fallen on the floor and cut his head. He didn't notice until morning, the blood streaking his pillow and shirt. He thought he dreamed the thing, the falling, the lying still, the getting up and back in bed. He's called me to come and get him and drive him to the doctors because the cut is deep and won't stop bleeding. And I've arrived to see him pale and worried and in this way different. I've thought of him always as young, several years behind my friends' fathers, having married early, still in school, younger then than I am now, my father, in the passenger seat, his bandaged head. The same father who's rebuilt cars for 3 decades, wielding grease-flecked hands beneath a hood to force an engine back to life. And I recall the gasp and sputter and sudden roar in the driveway of our house as a motor caught at last, his voice raised above the noise, calling out for us to look. Now, in my middle age, my father tense beside me, I see him as he really is, as he must be, changed by years, in need of those he taught not to need, but to do for themselves, and to never, not ever, pity him. My dad will want you to know that he fell because he was sick, not because he's old, and that he's not actually 60 yet. He asked me to say that. This next one, I talk with my students a lot. I teach creative writing at Arkansas Tech, and I've taught at several other places too, but I talk with my students about recognizing their obsessions as writers. And sometimes we're told, don't write too much about one subject, and I tell them, recognize your obsessions and write as much as you want about them. I have an obsession with writing about old women. I don't know why, but I've stopped fighting it, and this is one of my many old women poems. This is called Vera. I can still picture the black shoes of my great aunt, her muscular legs, no ankles to speak of, planted firmly in the grass behind her house. Some Sundays after church, my sister and I made the long drive with our parents to see her. No children of her own, no grandchildren, my mother would say on the way, as if hers was a loneliness we could ease or undo. After iced tea, always set out before we arrived, my great aunt would send my sister and me running through the backyard around her as she stood fixed in one place, casting her arms this way and that, trying to catch us running by, reaching for an elbow, the back of a knee, reaching to grasp us, squealing, not wanting to be caught, held tight and kissed. We laughed, my sister and I, and ran, and eventually forgot those Sunday afternoons as Vera got older and sicker, as they all do, those great aunts, those neighbors and distant cousins, those old women who leave brief memories, the faintest smell of powder, their hands as strong as men's, grasping for us as we run. The last 2 poems I'm going to read are both about ghosts. The manuscript I recently finished is called Spectre, and it has a lot of ghost poems and stories in it. It's also about what haunts us in other ways. So I'm going to read the first poem from that collection and the last. The first one is called Dorm Ghosts. So I went to Sewanee, University of the South, for undergrad. It's a very old school with Gothic architecture. It's modeled after Oxford, and it's got a lot of ghost lore, so like every place that Sewanee is haunted. And so I lived in a really small girls' dormitory my freshman year, and it was said to be haunted by the ghost of a former matron of that hall. And so I wrote this poem. It's the first poem in my manuscript. It's called Dorm Ghost, Johnson Girls Dormitory, Sewanee, Tennessee. They said she walked the 3rd floor hall and warned those of us just moved in to watch at night for shadows passing underneath our doorways, sliding smooth. They said she'd been a matron young and hanged herself or fallen or passed from fever. The story always changed. But however it was she died, we were certain it was tragic, not her time. And we called to her from midnight seances and with a Ouija board my roommate brought from home. We circled ourselves there with candles on the floor, begging her to show herself to those who dared to look. A girl across the hall swore she'd heard her calling from the basement. Another claimed she'd seen a blackened figure in the side yard, wandering alone. I looked for her an entire year, my first away from home, but never found what others somehow had, proof that she had stayed, that she was with us all that time, watching from whatever distant place we could not touch, though we were desperate to. And then the last one is the final poem in that manuscript, Spectre, and it's called Diviner. When I was writing Spectre, I was doing a lot of research on like ghost science throughout the centuries, different methods that people have attempted to use throughout the centuries to communicate with ghosts. And one method that I was especially interested in was using dowsing rods. And so I'm sure you guys know this, but dowsing rods are kind of Y-shaped rods or sticks traditionally used to find underground water. But some people claim that they can detect energy from the presence of ghosts. I think the reason I was so interested in this method is because most quote-unquote communications with the dead are meant to yield messages, like seances, mediums, listening to white noise, like what the dead would tell us or want to tell us. But with dowsing rods, they're only meant to indicate the presence of spirits. There's no further communication other than that. So this is a sonnet, and it's called Diviner. Like one who hunts for water, she seeks those who cannot be seen. A surge of energy, she says, or magnetic pull, which force the dowsing rod she clasps to shudder faintly or sometimes pitch, as if another grasped their ends. This, she says, a sign. But whether fearsome or kindly, a curse to know or gift, she cannot tell them that. Those who come to watch her douse the dead, they're dead, who bring questions and demands and cry for want of closure or for the belief that they have found it, a lingering existence enough to prove that the living are yet loved, that there beneath the hard, dry earth, a sea. Thank you.